I've been dreading making this video for a little while now, if only because I feel like anything I say here will pale in comparison to the scope and the execution and the grandeur of a film like this. It's really one of those like, where do I begin types of scenario. The film is just so incredibly multifaceted, and I ask that you bear with me. I just have a lot of thoughts on Brady Corbet's The Brutalist. So let's dive into it. The Brutalist tells the story of Laszlo Toth, a Hungarian Jewish architect who emerges to the United States after surviving the horrors of World War II. Hoping to rebuild his life and reunite with his family, he struggles to find footing in post-war America, navigating poverty, cultural dislocation, and artistic ambition. When a wealthy industrialist commissions him to design a grand community center, the project offers Laszlo a chance at redemption and a legacy. As he dedicates himself to the task, the film explores the weight of survival, the compromises of assimilation, and the tension between ambition and morality. Laszlo's journey is both intimate and expansive, a story about identity, resilience, and the human desire to create something enduring in the face of destruction. So I'll come right out and say it. I love this movie. I really do, and this is an annoying but, I am frustrated by it, and I'll explain why in a little bit. The immigrant experience and the artist's struggle in The Brutalist mirror one another. Both are about trying to create something meaningful in a world that resists you. There's a scene pretty late in the movie, and I believe it was in the trailer, where Laszlo flat out says, "They don't want us here." Laszlo's journey is as much about survival as it is about self-expression. Through his character, the film asks, how do you build a life, an identity, a legacy, within a world that's determined to strip those things from you? A significant layer of The Brutalist lies in its architectural metaphor. Laszlo is tasked with building a multi-purpose community center with a gym, a library, a church, each space serving disparate functions yet existing within the same building. And this assignment parallels the film's thematic construction, compartmentalizing identity, ambition, power dynamics, spirituality into separate but interdependent components. But there's another layer to this metaphor. It reflects the process of making a film itself. Just like Laszlo's designs for the building, creating a movie involves balancing disparate elements: artistic vision, technical execution, financial limitations, and audience expectations. Each part serves a specific function, but they have to come together seamlessly to form something greater than the sum of their parts. And much like brutalist architecture, filmmaking is ultimately about creating something that endures, something that speaks to future generations, even if the journey to completion is filled with compromise, conflict, and sacrifice. In this way, The Brutalist isn't just about a story of an architect, it's a deeply allegorical reflection of the struggle and ambition of any artist striving to leave a lasting mark, something that deeply resonates with me. And something I believe that was born out of Brady Corbet's last film, Vox Lux. Apparently, maybe he didn't have the best time making it, and this film is sort of his response to that. There's a quote in the film where Laszlo says, "Is there a better description of a cube than that of its own construction?" And this line encapsulates the film's central tension, the struggle to define oneself in a world that sees you only through the structures that you create. It rejects the interplay between form and meaning, art and function, and the very human desire to leave a mark on this world, even if the world refuses to acknowledge it. Adrian Brody delivers a career-defining performance as Laszlo Toth, bringing a quiet intensity and raw vulnerability that echoes his earlier work in films like The Pianist. He masterfully portrays a man caught between hope and despair, making every subtle expression and gesture really resonate within me. Perhaps my favorite scene that displays Adrian Brody's acting prowess is the scene where Guy Pearce's character, Harrison Van Buren, the wealthy benefactor, goes to find Laszlo Toth and shows him photographs of his work that's still standing in Budapest. And Adrian Brody's character can't believe that his work stood the test of time, that it's still standing where it was all those years ago, and that it's still well regarded and well respected, even after the Germans deemed it unsatisfactory. The look on Adrian Brody's face when he sees the photographs in the folder knocked me out both times that I saw this movie. And there's a smaller moment not too much later in the movie where Laszlo Toth meets a lawyer of Harrison Van Buren who claims to be able to get Laszlo's wife and niece out of Europe and into the United States The sense of gratitude on Adrian Brody's face, as well as the hope that this may actually come to fruition, is just delightful to see. Adrian Brody definitely delivers one of, if not my favorite performance of 2024. And I'm filming this the day after the Golden Globes happened, and I'm just very excited to see that he won there, and I'm hoping that this winning streak continues. Felicity Jones is equally compelling as Ershebet, Laszlo Toth's wife, who is in Europe for the first half of the movie and then comes over to America in the second half. And she captures both resilience and fragility in her portrayal of a woman grappling with the aftermath of this unimaginable trauma. Not enough people are talking about her performance, or if they are, they kind of consider her to be a weak point in the movie. And I don't necessarily agree. I actually think that the core trio, Adrian Brody, Felicity Jones, and Guy Pearce, all work really, really well together and help complement one another. And that being said, let's talk about Guy Pearce as Harrison Van Buren. He's just magnetic. He's one of those characters that you love to hate, and Guy Pearce nails that balance of charm and menace. And any scene with him and Adrian Brody in it is just electric. There's one scene in particular where they have a very long, drawn-out conversation, and Harrison Van Buren, Guy Pearce, basically just lays out his whole world philosophy. And the second time around watching it, I was really, really struck by this scene and by Guy Pearce's performance. He's also oddly the funniest character in the movie, which you might not expect this movie to be funny at all, but my theater was laughing quite a bit several times at a lot of his lines specifically, especially when he calls the conversations that he and Laszlo have intellectually stimulating. You've got to hand it to Brady Corbet. He is not holding back. He's working from a tradition of filmmakers who announce their work's importance from the very get-go. We're talking about shooting the film in VistaVision, releasing it in 70mm, structuring the movie like a grand literary epic. Clocking in at around 3.5 hours, it has an overture, an intermission, it's broken up into 2 parts, and it even has an epilogue. This isn't just a film, it's a capital F film, and Brady Corbet is saying, yeah, this is meant to be big. VistaVision, if you don't know, was a format fairly popularized in the 1950s and adopted by filmmakers like Alfred Hitchcock, who shot To Catch a Thief and Vertigo using it. The DP, Lowell Crowley, noted the VistaVision was a cinematic process that competed with the advent of television and was a way of trying to draw audiences back into the theaters, which is extra interesting considering the state of the film industry and people trying to draw audiences into theaters, and the fact that this film is marketed pretty heavily around the use of this format. And on that note, did I mention that this film looks goddamn beautiful? Because it does. I think you could tell that from the trailer alone. For all its grandeur, though, the movie is not just about showing off. At its heart, it is a character study, what you might call a micro-epic. It's wrestling with huge ideas, but it does so through deeply personal, intimate moments. It's the kind of film that's concerned with the quiet conversations at a dinner table as much as it is sweeping shots of architectural behemoths and Italian marble mines. After a festival screening, Brady Corbet shared some fascinating thoughts during a Q&A. He likened filmmaking to being in bed with people who don't share your ethics while trying to protect the flame of your project. And it's a striking metaphor that reflects the compromises and battles that artists face to get their visions on screen, as well as the battles that Laszlo Toth is facing in the movie. Remember what I said about this being an allegory for filmmaking. And he also made it clear in that same Q&A that he's not interested in making films that don't engage with big societal questions. For him, if a story isn't grappling with something larger than itself, then what's the point? And that's interesting. So let's talk about that a bit. There's a certain subset of cinema, grand, ambitious, and unapologetically self-serious, that seems almost designed to court both acclaim and skepticism. These films, often referred to as white elephant films, are massive in scope, they're thematically dense, and they're unrelenting in their desire to wrestle with capital B, capital I, big ideas. They ask for attention and they demand interpretation, and in doing so, they often provoke intense reactions from critics and audiences alike. Brady Corbet's The Brutalist is firmly within this lineage. if you couldn't tell by now. From the outset of its reception at festivals, The Brutalist invited comparisons to titans of quote-unquote serious cinema. Films like Paul Thomas Anderson's There Will Be Blood and The Master, Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather, and Bernardo Bertolucci's The Conformist. These aren't just films at this point, they're touchstones of cultural discourse. And while such comparisons can elevate expectations, they also create an environment where a film like The Brutalist is prejudged before it comes out, scrutinized for whether it truly deserves to be mentioned alongside these classics. These types of questions come up once in a blue moon and are really reserved for a certain type of film and a certain type of filmmaker. But why are these films so polarizing? I could think of a couple reasons. One, cynicism toward ambition. In an era where blockbuster entertainment and digestible streaming content dominates, films like The Brutalist can feel like they're a little bit out of step. Their deliberate pacing, their dense symbolism, their high art aspirations can often alienate viewers used to quicker gratification. Brady Corbet's decision to shoot the film in VistaVision, his literary structuring of the film with overtures and intermissions, and his deeply political underpinnings invite admiration, but they also challenge viewers to engage on his own terms. And for some people out there, this comes off as, I hate using this word, pretentious, as if the film is asking to be placed on a pedestal before earning the right to do so. The skepticism toward quote-unquote self-important films is also tied to a broader anti-intellectualism in popular culture. There's a tendency to view high-concept or politically charged films as inaccessible, elitist, or needlessly complex. Audiences sometimes, I think, resist films like The Brutalist, not because they dislike them, but because they feel like these works demand a kind of reverence or interpretation that makes them feel self-conscious about their own viewing experience. Films like PTA's There Will Be Blood and The Master have faced similar critiques. Are they brilliant dissections of power, faith, and humanity, or are they overindulgent exercises in style over substance? The truth often lies somewhere in between, but the point is that the perception of a film, quote-unquote, proclaiming its own importance can overshadow its actual achievements. Brady Corbet's film doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's clear at this point. It's a deliberate response to the grand traditions of epic filmmaking, but it's also deeply personal and self-reflective, a micro-epic that interrogates the personal cost of artistic creation, assimilation, and survival in the face of cultural and systemic oppression. God, I'm using a lot of words to talk about this movie. It's a big movie, so I guess it sort of makes sense. The Brutalist also carries with it the burden of its scale. The 3.5-hour runtime is just the tip of the iceberg. Films like The Brutalist challenge us to think critically, not just about their themes, but about how we, as audiences, engage with cinema. Do we allow ourselves to be swept up in the ambition, or do we resist because we're afraid of seeming duped or unsophisticated? Are we possibly, as a society, rejecting films like The Brutalist because they fail on their own terms, or because we're conditioned to distrust ambition and sincerity in an age of irony and detachment? I'm saying all of this, and I'm also very well aware that the film is pretty well regarded in most circles, both in critics and audience circles, but I guess I'm trying to grasp at some phenomenon that we see from time to time, and I can't really think of the last time that we've seen a narrative like this unfold. I just mean that when we approach a film with the expectation that it fits into a specific lineage or tradition, we inevitably judge it against those terms. Like, if it doesn't evoke the operatic tension of The Godfather or the searing intensity of There Will Be Blood, we might see it as lesser, not because it fails on its own terms, but because it doesn't align with the narrative that we've imposed onto it. For The Brutalist, this can mean that viewers miss the quieter, more idiosyncratic moments, the subtle and not so subtle interplay of architecture and power dynamics, or its meditation on the immigrant experience. These elements, which can feel deeply resonant on their own, can feel diminished when we're busy measuring them against preconceived standards of what a quote-unquote serious American epic should look or feel like. Instead of asking questions like, where does this fit in the pantheon of great cinema, or does this deserve the comparisons it's getting, maybe we should be asking, what is this film saying to me right now? What emotions is it stirring? What questions is it asking? What connections is it drawing between my own world and the world of the film? And this doesn't mean ignoring the broader context. Films like The Brutalist are clearly in dialogue with cinema history, and understanding that can enrich our experience. But it does mean prioritizing the raw act of viewing over the intellectual exercise of categorizing or canonizing a movie like this. Sometimes the most profound connections that I make with art are the ones that emerge when I simply let it wash over me. I want to touch on a larger cultural phenomenon, the way that we engage with art in the age of endless discourse. Today, every film arrives preloaded with a narrative. What does it mean for the director's career? How does it rank among its contemporaries? Is it a masterpiece, a failure, or something in between? And while these conversations are valuable, they can also distract from the essence of the work itself. I just think we need to resist the urge to define the film in relation to other films and instead let it stand on its own, messy, ambitious, flawed, and alive. You may remember earlier when I said I was frustrated by this movie. Remember that? It was like 3 hours ago, so I'd understand if you don't. The first half of The Brutalist is so meticulously constructed, pun intended, that it's hard not to be drawn in. The power dynamics, the slow burn relationships, and Laszlo Toth's battles with ambition, addiction, and survival feels irresistible. But when his wife, Erzsébet, enters the picture in the second half, the film takes a pretty dramatic shift. It becomes something more chaotic, more emotionally raw, and for me, more divisive. It's like the story wobbles off of its carefully laid axis, which is probably intentional, but still a little bit jarring. And I want to put in big, bold letters right here, spoiler warning, because I will be talking about the final 20 minutes of the film. The ending in particular is strange, both as a deliberate subversion of expectations and as a somewhat blunt rejection of how epic dramas like this typically resolve themselves. Laszlo Toth's arc essentially concludes in the hospital where he's broken physically and emotionally after accidentally overdosing his wife on heroin, which was meant to ease her pain due to her osteoporosis. He tells her that they'll go to Jerusalem to live with their niece, but then he vanishes from the narrative altogether. When Erzsébet takes center stage, confronting the Van Buren family and exposing Harrison as a rapist who assaulted Laszlo, the film feels like it's about to reach this boiling point, this climactic finale. And then it just kind of stops. Harrison flees and a search party forms, but before anything actually resolves, we jump to the epilogue. I remember the woman seated right next to me in the theater threw her hands up when the epilogue title card appeared, and I get that reaction. I kind of felt that way too. The film shifts its focus so dramatically in the final act, it almost feels like it's deliberately cutting off the closure that we've been waiting for. And in the epilogue, we see Toth again, but only as a silent, wheelchair-bound old man at his own architectural retrospective. It's such a stark contrast to the grand, defiant character that we followed for so long, and even now I'm torn on whether or not I understand or respect the choice. But that's part of what makes The Brutalist so fascinating to me. Every decision, every line of dialogue feels purposeful, begging to be unpacked and examined. But it also leaves you grappling with its decisions in ways that can feel frustrating, even a little bit alienating. And maybe that's the point. It's a film that challenges you to critique it, to sit with its contradictions and find your own answers. And while I'm still wrestling with how I feel about the way Laszlo's story concludes, I can't deny that the film as a whole stayed with me, lingering in the back of my mind long after the credits rolled. Like what I said at the beginning of this video, I didn't really know where to start, and I find it difficult to find a proper place to stop when it comes to talking about this movie. I can sit here and rattle off my favorite scenes or most memorable moments. I could sit here and get super intellectual about digging into the grand and ambitious ideas that the film has and is displaying. Or I could simply leave it where I left it and say that movies like this are rare in this day and age, and it's rare for them to be hitting such a public spotlight in the way that it is in this day and age. And we should do our duty as cinema lovers, as film lovers, to lift it up and to prop it up as an example of what you can do with Final Cut and what a filmmaker can do that has ambition. And when people take risks on something, this film was a risk for a lot of people, and a lot of people put a lot of hard work into it, and it seems to be paying off. Brady said it in his acceptance speech at the Golden Globes. He said, this movie works. He said this film works. And you could look at that as a guy who's a little bit full of himself, or you could look at it as a guy who's really trying to encourage producers and studios to back those ambitious projects. I didn't even talk about how this film allegedly cost $10 million to make, but it looks like it could have cost $100 million. The movie is on track to be a success, both in a financial sense and a critical sense, and I think that that's awesome. While I have my reservations about the film, particularly in the second half, it is one that flies by. The 3.5-hour runtime should not scare anyone out there. I wouldn't call this movie a slog to get through by any means, but I am left grappling with my feelings about the ending. And that's all I think I'm going to say about The Brutalist for now. I'm going to be talking about it a lot as award season keeps going. So those are my thoughts. And if I have more, I'll jump back on here and give you some more, but I'll let you know. But what did you think of The Brutalist? Am I way off base? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know down in the comments. Be sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell to be notified when new videos come out on this channel. As always, thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I know it's a very small and new channel, but I'm hoping to grow as the weeks and months go on. Hit me up on Letterboxd. My Letterboxd account is right over here. And yeah, I'll see you all next time. Go see The Brutalist.